أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأراضين روحي وأرواحنا لتراب مقدمه الفداء فقد قال الله في كتابه المجيد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد. For the hastening of the reappearance of our Imam, please recite a louder salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And to the extent of our desire to be the Abbas, to be the Zainab of the Imam of our time, please recite the loudest of salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. What we've been discussing is about the intellect, and we've reached a point where we're talking about what a society that is formed on the intellect and is using the intellect properly, what does it look like? How does it act? And we've been saying that the way, then the first sort of thing that we need to think about if we want to change things to even achieve something close to that is to see why are we stopping, what is stopping us from forming that society in the first place? What are the barriers? And so we talked about several things in terms of individualism, in terms of the sort of attachment to this world and sort of glitter and glory, the false sort of ideas of success that we have. And it's only through turning towards reality and what is actually real and meaningful and impactful that we can have this deep bonds and attachment. And this is something that we see, that any group can form for any reason, right? You can have a group that's based on ethnicity, you can have a group that's based on, a different religion, common language. You could have groups formed for any sort of commonality, right? There's no restriction to that. But you see that the ones that share the weakest in terms of, moving forward in goals or anything like that, is when that identity is based on something that's less real to them. Right? So if people don't identify strongly with that label, if they don't see it to be real to them, then the unity that's formed on the basis of that label becomes much weaker. For example, right, people have a lot of pride, for example, at least in the United States. I don't think it's maybe to the same fervor in Canada, but in the United States, people have a lot of pride regarding their sports teams of the universities that they go to, right? Extreme amounts of pride. Right? Maybe even more than the professional sports teams. They have much more sort of pride and fervor regarding their university sports teams. To the extent that you'll see that people have that as almost like a label that they put on themselves that's generational. That it's like almost become like a thing that we're of this university. We're the supporters of this university. Right? And it's something that becomes such a strong part of who they are. It's almost like you can take out the other things, but you can't take that. That's like, everything. And so the bonds they form based on with other people that share that same commonality is strong, right? But it's not lasting, right? Despite its strength. Right? The extent of how much that can inform on one's life is limited. At the end of the day, that identity, even though it's strong, and even though they feel a lot of fervor for it, it doesn't extend to, for example, informing on the decisions of jobs, the decisions of, where we should live, or decisions of, how we should act and interact, what morality we should have, what ethics we should have, what we're aiming for in life. Should we give charity, should we not? All of these things, it doesn't really inform on it, because the capacity of that identity is so weak. Right? It's just a very, very minor slice of one's life. Right? On the other hand, sometimes we have identities that are very encompassing, right? That they're very wide in nature. They have a whole package of ideals and customs and things. But since they're not rooted, and they don't take root in our hearts, a lot of times, it weakens. Sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes people's ethnic identity is like this, especially when people move from that original country that they came from to a different country, right? Like many of us. You see that as a generation goes, the identity to that ethnic background weakens. Right? That's a natural thing, because people don't identify with it as the next generation comes and the next generation comes. Right? Sometimes people don't even speak that same language. They lose those customs and things, and then over time, it's not really the only sort of thing that they really identify is that, oh, okay, my generations past, someone came from that place. So even though that original ethnicity had a very broad spectrum of things, right? It had culture, had customs, had practices, had, various sort of ethics and morality, had, a whole sort of set of principles and expectations. Even though it's very broad, it might not be rooted very deeply. It could be rooted. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but many times it isn't. The whole thing about Islam is that we're supposed to take it in a way that in both aspects, both it's very broad in terms of what it encompasses. It encompasses various aspects, all of these things, all aspects and dimensions of life, much beyond any other type of identity could. And also in terms of depth of identity, of how much to the bones one can identify and see oneself colored by that label, it has the highest extent in terms of potentiality. I'm not saying reality. If reality that was that, then we'd be in a great place. But in terms of potential, it has that. Why? Because everything about it is real. There's no dichotomy, there's no sort of out of syncness between it and what is actually out there. Everything is in line with reality. And because of that, it gives us that potential to hold on to much tighter than any other identity. Now you might say, okay, what's the big deal? Why can't I have, let's say, an identity as a Pakistani, a Desi, whatever ethnicity? Why can't I say that's the common ground? Why can't we say, or even a mixture, right? Let's say that we want to make an Imam Barga for the people from, let's say, I won't mention a particular city, maybe people will take offense. Let's say some random city, right, from India or Pakistan. That's our Imam Barga, right, where we do our things there. Now I'm not saying that there's something particularly inherently wrong with that. Right? That's fine. You want to gather around people who share the same customs, speak in the same way, eat the same food as you. Comfort. That's nothing wrong. What will it be based on? Is it purely Islam and it's just by happenstance that this geographical customs and things also came with it? Then that's okay. There's no problem. But most of the time it's not like that. Most of the time it's a mixture of things. And so when push comes to shove, and I'm saying that, okay, it would be a lot better, it would be serving the community better if we had a joint program. It would be serving the community better if the program was in English, for example. I'm not saying definitively, I'm saying for example, if that were the case. People say, no, how could that be? We can't give up the Urdu. We can't give up the customs. We can't give up that. And so you see that the decision making changed. What happened wasn't, the idea wasn't what is Islamically better. What is my Islamic label pulling me towards? That identity pulling me to, rather it's this other label. And that forms a lot of issues that we find. If we want to have anything resembling an ideal society, then first and foremost we have to identify ourselves as purely Muslims. And I said many times, right? That doesn't mean that nothing about you can be defined by any other characteristic. No, it can and it is. But those aren't primary. Those aren't fundamental. They don't change whether or not I choose and accept something from Islam or not. Now, if we look at the verse that we recited, it said, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. It says that you are the best of nations. Right? But then it describes, right? It's describing the Muslims, saying not just leaving it at that. You're the best of nations. In which manner? Why? How did you qualify? Because you would do amr bil ma'roof and nahy anil munkar. And you had iman billah. So as we talked about last time, if we want to build this identity, one of the crucial things that we need to do is have concern for each other. And concern for each other at the lowest level manifests in the sense of, for example, giving charity, giving money to help each other. It's still extremely good and necessary, but that's the lowest level. At the higher levels, it means that I am concerned for not only your well-being in this world, but in the akhirah. And so if I see you doing something wrong, I'll remind you. And if you see me doing something wrong, then I expect you to remind me as well. And it's only through making those kinds of links and bonds that we can move forward. If we examine, based on this principle, based on this idea, the structure that exists usually between couples, especially younger couples, especially couples, that were brought up in the, Western atmosphere, watching Disney movies and having a fairy tale romantic idea of what marriage looks like. You see strange things happening. Ideas such as, why, if you love me, why do you want to change me? Right? Why can't you love me for who I am? That's utter nonsense. That makes no sense whatsoever. If I love someone, then the whole point is that I want what's best for them. And that obviously means that they're going to change. They're going to become better, inshallah. Obviously I want them to change. I want me to change too. That's the whole point. But for some reason we have this idea that no, I need to be accepted for who I am at this moment, whatever I decide, and nobody has the right to tell me otherwise. Islam doesn't accept that. Not at all. Now that doesn't mean on the flip side that, okay, the couples go and then everyone is, yelling at each other, screaming at each other, saying, do this, don't do that. No, obviously it should be a loving relationship. It shouldn't be that, grudges are held on to, that, people are like, no, you did the wrong thing, you oppressed me. No, let go of it. We have, for example, a beautiful ayah of the Quran. It says, the end of Surah Fath. It says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله والذين معه أشداء على الكفار ورحماء بينهم. Says that Muhammad is a prophet, the messenger of Allah, and the people with him, they are severe and strict with the kuffar, but amongst themselves they're merciful, they're kind. Another place says أذلة على المؤمنين. They're humble before the mu'mineen. Sometimes we look at ourselves in our interactions, we see it's the exact opposite. Right? That the people that we're the most tolerant of, the most lenient with, our work associates, random people, the ones that we don't know that much, the ones that who share neither our culture nor our religion, those are the ones that we find we're the most tolerant of, most lenient with. But when it comes to ourselves, within the community, within a family, find the severest, strictest, most expecting, harshest. Why would we do that? Why would we harm ourselves like that? If we treat each other with that respect and love and care and give each other time and time again, opportunity after opportunity to become better, then it becomes something beautiful. But if we're always at each other's throats, waiting for each other to make a mistake and then point it out and laugh at it and make fun or to put that person down and denigrate them, that's never going to build something powerful. That's never going to build meaningful bonds. This is not something that's some strange idea that I'm talking about. It's something that should practically be common sense for anyone who has a level of maturity and experience in life. Those bonds are not going to be made in that manner. Now, again, that doesn't mean, I'm trying to sort of balance the two extremes. That doesn't mean that I'm just completely let go and I'm like the yes man to everything that's happening in my family. You do something bad, I'm saying it's okay. You do something good, every time you do anything, I clap my hands and I say, great job. No, obviously not. There has to be a reaction, there has to be a push, there has to be critique, there has to be all that. But we're talking about the manner, the way in which it's done, the tolerance that we should have. That's crucial. Now there's another series of hadith, maybe just to sort of really solidify this concept and the importance of this Amr bil Ma'ruf. It's in Surah Ma'idah, verse number 78 and 79. It says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لعن الذين كفروا من بني إسرائيل على لسان داود وعيسى بن مريم ذلك بما عصوا وكانوا يعتدون. Says, cursed are the ones who did kufr, who disbelieved from among the Bani Israel upon the tongues of Dawood and Isa ibn Maryam. And this is for why? Because of that which they disobeyed and what they've done in transgression. Then the next ayah, describing in which manner did they disobey? How did they do this transgression? كانوا لا يتناهون عن منكر فعلوه. They used to not forbid each other from the wrong that was being done, that they were committing. This caused them to be cursed on the tongues of prophets. So just trying to encapsulate within ourselves the importance of this. That without having this perspective, then everything else starts to go away. Because if we're not that check on each other, if we're not guaranteeing each other, we're not looking out for each other, and caring and safeguarding each other's iman, then as an individual, it's extremely unlikely for us to make it. And if we don't make it, then the whole fabric of that society erases. I'm not saying that there isn't any society left, but what's left is a society based on principles and criteria and ideals that are not Islamic. And so it's far from that reality. Now, just again to make maybe this sink in a bit further from a little different aspect. Let's look at it from a slightly different perspective. I'll pose a question, right? And let's all think about it, inshallah. Think about it to ourselves. Why don't I say salawat loudly? Sure, there's times when everyone is there and the speaker said, say it on the loudest of your voice, and then okay, yeah, people do it. Right? They've been pushed so much that eventually they do it. But on my own, if everybody else isn't doing it, if I would be the only one doing it. Yes, some sisters might say, okay, we don't want to do it because it's a mixed gathering. That's fair. That's your reason. You don't want your voice to be heard by non-mahrams. That's completely fair. That's good, mashallah. But what about in the sisters' gatherings? Again, everyone doing it, probably you'll do it too. But what about when very few people are? Why am I so afraid to be saying it? What's keeping me back? Is it something that, I'm so holy and spiritual that, my voice can only go a certain level of decibels, and beyond that, it's not allowed for me to heighten my voice? Because I would love to read where that's recommended, but as far as I know, that's not. But it's such a sort of almost fundamental thing, not in terms of like comparing it to Tawheed in levels of importance, but in terms of how easy the practice is and how commonplace it is and how obvious it is. Why wouldn't we do it? What's holding us back? And each person might have a particular individual thing, a plethora of various, variety of individual reasons. They don't feel it, they don't want to do it, it seems weird, it seems strange, this and that. But one of those things for sure is this, is that there's also not really any social expectation for me to do it. If I don't do it, it's not like anyone will look at me weird as if like, why didn't you say the salawat? Right? Sometimes it's the opposite. The people who say loud get the weird looks. Right? But if we had that expectation of each other, that look, this is an obvious thing. This isn't something that costs you anything. This isn't something that you need to sacrifice anything for. It's a very easy expression of devotion. I would expect you to at least be able to do that. Even if you don't believe it, at least fake it till you make it. Because you don't have that expectation. And so we don't have that peer pressure on each other. And so it falls apart. The same thing with all the other practices that we see. Salat. Salat is a no-brainer. It's not something debatable, like is it wajib, is it not wajib? No. There's no disagreement, there's no argument, there's no discussion, there's no confusion about it. It's not difficult. What's required, what's wajib in salah is simple. It's easy. It's not a long time commitment. But because we don't have that expectation for each other, we see someone in our friend circle not praying, we just ignore it. We turn our face away maybe a little bit. That's maybe an ideal case scenario. But do we ever mention it? Do we ever come up to them and say, hey, what's going on? Why don't we? What's holding us back from that? What are we so afraid of? Having those conversations, having those moments where we put ourselves out there is necessary in order to form deep bonds. I promise you, not a single deep, meaningful relationship that, for the vast majority of people, there's exceptions, but for the vast majority of people, none of them are built with only having positive talk and like just being sort of patting each other on the back and saying, you did a good job, let's do whatever you want, oh, you did this, okay, that's good, that's good, that's good. No. It comes through struggle, difficulties, hardships. Sometimes that comes in the form of having to critique each other. Having friendships, bonds, relationships that are principled will always, always outweigh those that are just, based on having a good time. Because eventually that good time might mean that I have to split with that person. And that bond breaks. So we have to look at it from that perspective of what we're aiming for. What is that ultimate goal that we're struggling for? What is that reality that exists? Orient our individual framework and decision-making paradigm based on that, and that informs on our relationships and the bonds that we make and how we deal with ourselves within those relationships as well. Now, on the topic of guidance and looking for guidance, obviously, as we've mentioned, having a group and a bond is not inherently good. Just because I'm a group, and just even, I'll say it like this, just because it's a group of mu'mineen, doesn't make it inherently something good. A group of Muslims, it doesn't make it inherently good. You want an example? Look at Karbala, right? On the other side of the battlefield is a group of Muslims. They're very tightly bound too, right? They're working together. They don't have any disunity. Maybe one or two examples, but vast majority, they went on that mission for fighting Imam Hussain and they continued on it. Just being a group of Muslims and group of mu'mineen isn't enough. It has to be oriented in the right direction. It has to be guided in the right direction. And so it has to be based on real things too. The axis upon which that group circulates and is bound together has to also be true. And so there's a need, a constant need for guidance, both on that individual level and on that social level. We can't cut it off and say that, okay, the guidance that we need is telling me how to pray, is telling me the ahkam of fasting, of khums, of this, of that. But in terms of, my social interactions, my relationships, my this, my that, no, I don't need any guidance. My business transactions. Islam isn't there where you can just compartmentalize it and say that, okay, I can just have it here. No, the guidance is needed in all of those aspects. Now, please recite Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. It's sometimes difficult for us to see, right? Because, again, we don't see ourselves usually across the timeline. We don't see ourselves as people who are changing. We see ourselves in snapshots, where we are right now, at a moment. And so we don't see the effect that things have on us. But when you look across generational lines, that's when sometimes we can realize things. When you look at across generational lines of how values have changed. We're not even talking from a religious standpoint. Look at Canadian society or United States society, whatever sort of society that you're familiar with. And look, a previous generation back or two generations back. And compare the ideas and the thoughts and the things that were there and seen to be good. Right? If you want stark examples, look, 300 years ago compared to now. Right? Slavery was seen as something good. Slavery was seen as something good. Right? It was a source of, monetary wealth. It was a source of, getting things done. People, even Christians, start to justify it too, right? As in, it was good for the slaves for them to be enslaved. Right? Nowadays, if you say something, anything like that, be an uproar. And it should be an uproar, right? Especially in the way that the slavery was done and perceived. My point isn't that there's something, about slavery that we're supposed to be discussing, or any of the details and things that we see that are changing. The point is this: there is change happening. There is a direction that people are going on. Society is constantly on the move. There is no steady, constant place. And if I'm not cognizant of who I'm giving the reins of myself to and my community to, then it will naturally go in the flow and the current of the people around them and the environment around them. It requires conscious and regular effort of course correction to avoid that in a society like this. And that does not happen just by being together. Right? Because all it does if you're together will just reinforce what everyone is thinking and doing. That doesn't mean that it's going to be the right thing. So just by being together, it could actually push us further and quicker on the wrong way if we're not careful. So we have to give the reins to someone who knows what they're saying, to a system that is based on Islam. I'll mention another verse in the Quran. I'm forgetting the exact wording of it, so I'll open it first. It's in Surah Mujadala. It says, ألم تر أن الله يعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض ما يكون من نجوى ثلاثة إلا هو رابعهم ولا خمسة إلا هو سادسهم. It says that, do you not see, do you not know, do you not realize that certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that which is in the heavens and the earth? And there's never a whispering between a party of three except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the fourth, nor a whispering amongst a party of five unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the sixth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always there, constantly there. Wherever we are, wherever we turn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. Why am I bringing this up? It's because sometimes we give excuses to ourselves. We say that, sure, it's all fine and good for you to talk about guidance, about, Islamic awareness of going forward. But we're confused. We don't know which way to go. We don't have guidance. We don't know what step to take forward. Let's not trick ourselves. Let's not deceive ourselves. Yes, I'm not saying that everybody knows all the intricacies of Islam. Of course not. But almost for sure, we all know things that we're not acting on. We all know things that we could be doing, that are in front of us to do. Biggest example is this Quran. How often do we read it? How often do we contemplate on it? Right? There's an ayah in the Quran. Whenever you read it, whenever you think about it, it should put you into utter and abject terror. Rasulullah is quoted saying that, إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ مَهْجُورًا. My qawm, not a different people, not a different sort of group of people, not the disbelievers, my qawm, my people, have relegated this Quran to oblivion. Let's not deceive ourselves. We have guidance right in front of ourselves. I'm not saying we shouldn't seek more. We should, for sure. We should desire a true scholar who truly can have and put this Quran in their hearts to be leading us. We obviously need that. But does that mean, in the sense, if I don't have that scholar right in front of me, I don't have anything I can do? No. Guidance is there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to us in this Quran. It's a book of guidance for us. So we should use it. Use it in the source, in the way that it's meant to be used, as a source of guidance. Now, in the sense of societies and making bonds and relationships, there's another thing that is happening that is very crucial and necessary for us to recognize. And if we utilize our relationships in the right way and manner, we see it turns into something beautiful. One of our biggest difficulties and obstacles on the path towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our ego. Is us seeing everything about ourselves. Everything is about my personal benefit. What happens when we see ourselves not just as ourselves? I don't see myself as an individual. For example, I get married. Now I see myself as a couple. Right? Immediately, what happens naturally, it's not something that's forced, it's not something that needs to be sort of contrived, it's something that happens naturally, just because of the affection that exists between the couple. That ego is broken to a level. You don't see oneself as just this I anymore. There's a us now. Now that on its own, again, is not enough. But it's an extremely, extremely useful tool. Because one, it's so natural. And two, it does break the ego. What happens when we extend it? When the brothers, the sisters, don't see themselves in terms of I. It's us. If I could truly do that, see the ummah as one body, where if it's pained in one place, the whole body is pained. If I could truly do that, then a major portion and obstacle of the ego is erased. But it doesn't happen for free. It doesn't happen automatically. It happens by working and pushing ourselves to be together. Now, what's the connection between all of this and this intellect and a society based on the intellect? It's because all of these things that we're talking about, the structures of the family and the society and the ideals that we're going towards, they're all directed and informed by the intellect. The intellect pushes us in this direction. There's a beautiful hadith that says that the one who seeks knowledge, the one who is in the pursuit of knowledge, the angels spread their wings underneath their footsteps. It continues to say that فَضْلُ الْعَالِمْ عَلَى الْعَابِدِ, the sort of superiority of the person who knows, right, over the one who worships. Right? Obviously the one who knows also worships. I'm not saying that he doesn't worship. But the one who knows, and through that knowledge, that perception, that insight, worships, over the one who just worships, is like the superiority of a full moon over the stars on a night. Sometimes we stop ourselves from because of things we perceive to be religious motivations. We think to ourselves, I'm too busy doing this, majlis, I'm too busy doing this a'mal to help this brother, to help this sister. I'm too busy and involved and engrossed in this aspect of my life. Now, I'm not saying that there's no balance. There should be obviously a balance that's necessary. But we're talking about perspective, how we're looking at things. If I don't see them as separate from me, then why would I look and prioritize things in that way? It's the one who has insight into reality and sees it as a real bond, a real thing, a real inseparable nature between me and the fellow believers that can make those decisions. Otherwise, I see it always in terms of sacrifice. I'm giving up my personal thing for them. That's not how the caravan of Imam Hussain saw it. They didn't see, I'm giving up my life for the Imam. They saw their lives as owned by the Imam for that purpose, for Allah SWT. They were subsumed within that identity. That's what we're aiming for. To make bonds on that level. And if we don't make bonds on that level, we cannot expect that ideal society to come about. Inshallah, we can spend a few minutes commemorating and saying the Masayib of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Dear brothers and sisters, when we look at the caravan of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and we want to see a personality that embodies bravery, we look at Abbas. When we want to look at a personality that embodies loyalty, we look at Abbas. We want to look at a personality that embodies ultimate submission to their Imam, we look at Abbas. We want to look at someone who is ready to sacrifice everything, we look at Abbas. Assalamu alayka ya Abul Fadl al-Abbas. Ya Qamar Bani Hashim. For sure, on the caravan, on the journey to Karbala, if anyone needed comfort, if anyone needed a sense of security, of safety, all they would need to do would be to look at Abbas. One of the events in Ashura is that the Mal'oon Shimr at a time comes and approaches the tents calling out to Hazrat Abbas and his brothers because they shared a relation from the side of their mother with Shimr. He calls out to them and it's narrated that they don't respond until the Imam Hussain says that answer him, even if he's a fasiq, still answer him. They go out to see what he wants. And he says to them, come to me. I've been given a letter that guarantees your safety. You'll be safe, you don't need to die. It's narrated that Abbas responds, are you not ashamed You're giving safety to me, and you expect me to leave Imam Hussein? You're giving safety to me and expect me to leave him? And for him to die? They reject that letter. We mentioned that in the night when in the tent Imam Hussein's son had called all of the companions and his family together, the first to speak up and announce their devotion and readiness to sacrifice themselves for Abu Abdullah was Abbas. But on the day of Ashura, Abbas is not the first to go on the battlefield. Have we imagined how difficult that is? Have we imagined how difficult it is to not be the first, but rather to be the last? To have to see one after another, one's companions, one's friends, one's brothers, one's nephews, go onto the battlefield and sacrifice themselves and not return. A point is reached on the day of Ashura when Abbas is tired. He's tired of this life. He approaches Abu Abdullah Hussein. He asks him, "Oh my brother, do I have your permission to go onto the battlefield?" Imam Hussein responds, "Ya akhi, anta sahib al-lawai." You're the chief, you're the commander. If you go, what's left of my army? What's left of these people? But there is no one left. There is no one other than Abbas. According to some narrations, it said that Imam Hussein and Abbas, hearing the children's cries of Al-Atash at that time, Al-Atash, of thirst, hearing the children's cries, that Imam Hussein tells his brother, "Okay, go on to the battlefield, but go to the water and come back with that." It's narrated that Abbas fights valiantly. He goes until he reaches the Euphrates. Think about Abbas. How thirsty he must have been at that moment. How tired he must have been at that moment. It's narrated that perhaps he reached his hand into that water and raised it to his lips. But at that moment he thinks, am I going to drink this water while Hussein and the children are thirsty? So he doesn't drink the water. He starts carrying the water back. But it's narrated that he struck on the right side and his right arm falls. Then he struck on the left and the left arm. Until eventually he struck on the head and he falls from his horse. Dear brothers and sisters, have you thought about it? How does someone without arms break their fall? In which manner would he have fallen from? Imam Hussein rushes to the body of Abbas. It's narrated that he cries out, "Allah inkasara dhahri." Now my back is broken. وَقَلَّتْ حِيلَتِي. There's no more ways out. There's nothing left. Until that time, Abu Abdullah Hussein still had one companion, still had someone to rely on. But now he's left alone. And the cries of Alman, Nasrin Yansurani, Alman Dhaman, Yadman, Hamar Habba. Is there anyone there to help? All of these cries remain unanswered. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. مات من حسين.